of society and a very top-down culture and a top-down just general process. But we've seen now in the region and Saudi around the region playing a particular role, but using its private sector to kind of fill in some of the gaps. So we've seen this, for example, in Syria. When it comes to Egypt, you could see, for example, a partnership developing between Egypt, the Saudi private sector and Egypt. And what does this mean? Of course, again, it goes back to the question of, already? Oh my goodness, all right. It goes into the question of, it's a good thing it's my last point. It speaks to the notion of capacity. And I think we are seeing more of a geopolitical function that the Saudi private sector is playing that it has never played before. And in my opinion, I think this is a very interesting point in where I think there is this nexus of security, stability, and I would say prosperity. It's all hyphenated, it's all together. And I think the Saudi understanding does not separate that now. This is the evolution now that we're seeing in the Saudi calculus. So I think, of course, I think as Damiana mentioned, this is also something for us that's very crucial, which is food security. Also, it's very, very difficult. So this is a natural kind of sphere of cooperation. And I would say the last point, in my opinion, I think this last issue about capacity that I keep mentioning about, in my opinion, I think necessitates agency. I think it speaks to the question of agency. I think, you know, in order for them to really begin to engage more, there is agency and regional agency or African agency or sub-regional agency is a strategic tool for others. It's what we would need to cooperate even more. Now, of course, there is this aspect of asymmetry, which is important, and I think it is a problem even for us, because I think more and more people, because of the cultural ties that we have, you know, to be honest with you, awareness is being arised and awareness is increasing inside Saudi Arabia about the function and the manners and how we engage. And this, to be honest with you, is healthy. It needs a lot more development. It needs a lot more understanding. And the last point I would say is also when I said about issues of capacity. I mean, me and our other Saudi friend, Dr. Iyad Rifa'i, we were questioning on our last tour when we came to Africa is how many people study the Horn in Africa inside Saudi Arabia. And I'll be very honest with you, there's not much. And that's a gap that we need a lot of help in. It's not that we're coming here to help and all this nonsense. We need to be educated, I'll be honest with you. And I think so there are spheres of cooperation that is very exciting, I would say. So that's it for me.
Thank you very much, and sorry for cutting you short.
I'll forgive you. It's fine.
But thank you for being otherwise very disciplined on your inputs and the time management. So that gives us about 20, 25 minutes still for Q&A, and maybe there are some questions in the auditorium that you would like to ask and come into a discussion. I see over there, Cabasso, and then you, but let's start over there.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to ask on the Saudi kind of strategy. When Saudi Arabia involves itself, let's say, in sport, what exactly is the thinking behind that, the investment? Let's say you move into the English Premier League, you invest in Newcastle, you know, and you know, there'll be certain tournaments and all sorts of other things that you begin to bring into Saudi Arabia, where culturally you're still very conservative, but at the same time it's like we want this to come to us, but we really need to somehow constrain it, but we still need to give an image that we are modernizing. You know, as it seems to be some kind of contradictory values. You want certain things, but you still want to retain some control. But do some of these investments make sense, or really it is pretty much about the image of Saudi Arabia? Thank you.
Thank you very much. We had one more question over there.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much, colleagues, for your wonderful presentations. I've learned quite a lot. Mine is very simple. There's documented allegations of the Gulf, in particular the UAE, supporting armed forces in Sudan, including material support to the RISF. How does, maybe you take it, how does the UAE reconcile its stated commitments to a peaceful and stable Africa with these allegations of fueling conflict in Sudan, allegedly to gain access to resources like gold, regional influence over the Red Sea and the sea and so forth? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much for this. And up there was another hand. Let's maybe bring in this third question and then going back to the panel.
Morning, I'm sorry I came in late. My question is just, I don't know what CAPO is. If you can explain what they do and what is it?
Okay, then we take a fourth question because I will answer this question very briefly. Please, I think this hand was up first.
Hi, thank you so much for the really interesting presentation. And I'm looking forward to reading the paper on the NML Nexus framework. Something that Desiree touched on around agency being exerted, but not always for positive long-term development. Just a question, something I struggle with around African agency in general. When we talk about agency, like being exerted by elites, and possibly not for the benefit of the wider African population. And I just wonder, have you got a view on whether we actually need a new word for agency? I'm thinking particularly around the allegations that have been published in the New York Times around mistreatment of Kenyan women in Saudi Arabia. Thanks.
Thank you very much. We take another round of questions afterwards. And before I hand over to the panel, very briefly on CAPO. I mentioned it in the beginning, but I didn't want to take too much time. We're a think tank based in Germany focusing on the region of the Middle East. So we started about 10 years ago, 11 years, although there still says 10 years, with projects on Iran-Saudi dialogue. We worked a lot on the Persian Gulf region, on Yemen a lot, and then increasingly also on regions neighboring the Middle East. Yeah, please have a look at our website and learn more about our projects, also about the WhatsApp project. But yeah, I can also explain a little bit more later if you're interested. But going back to the panel, there were, of course, quite interesting questions on particularly the Saudi strategy and sports diplomacy. First, maybe Aziz, but I'm sure Sebastian would also like to come in when it comes to sports diplomacy. Then the one on the UAE in Sudan, and then also on the concept of agency. But maybe Aziz first.
So thank you very much for the question. I'm going to give my 2 cents, but I will defer to Sebastian. He's I would consider the authority on Saudi sports diplomacy on this issue. So I would say a few things from my point of view as a Saudi. Your point about contradictions is a very significant one, because this is something that has fascinated me, not only as a Saudi, but as a Saudi academic that studies Saudi Arabia. The way they deal with contradictions, or the way they square the circles at times, is part and parcel really of their calculation, not only domestically, but also foreign policy. And it's a very fascinating process. And so they know how to operate within this contradictions. There's always in a state of contradictions, or I would say in a constant state of balancing, which is a very interesting thing. In my opinion, I think when it comes to this aspect of conservatism, is very true. I remember very vividly as a teenager in the early, or in the 2000s, where Saudis were looking at others in the Gulf with their sports diplomacy and saying, this is nonsense. This is a waste of time. this is not serious. We are Saudis. We don't stoop to that kind of level. And they were probably, these smaller Gulf states probably had a longer vision because we were more conservative. This is the reality. Now I think we woke up to it when there was a generational change. And that, I think, also speaks to the heart of the issue as well, is that a part of the Saudi diplomacy, sports diplomacy, is firstly, there is Saudi presence in global stages, in global stages, which kind of resonates for Saudis domestically. Also, there is a strive towards trying to invest and create more spaces for young youth. But in my opinion, when it comes to the sports aspect in Newcastle and here and there, Newcastle, for example, in particular, is more branding, I would say. You know, it's more of a way of trying to show that we are present. It's a vehicle for other aspects. Saudi hosting the World Cup is something, it has a lot to do with Saudi identity, I would say, also, of saying we're a global player. We're not just a middle power. And you can see that a lot in the Saudi discourse, in my opinion, is that you hear even great Saudi Arabia. So while there's still a long way, I think that's an interesting point. The last thing I point about contradictions or conservatism, I really appreciate this point because a lot of the times people analyze Saudi and say, it's changed. You know, there's no more, people have changed and there's no conservatives. Now people are, no, there's still a significant amount of conservatives or conservative lifestyle, conservative society. And so that's part of the process of moving forward with Saudi. But when it comes to Saudi football, I'll stop there and I'll defer to Sebastian.
Thank you, Aziz. I mean, thank you for the question. As the topic is, of course, also close to my heart, please allow me maybe to give also 2-3 my brief assessment on that. So, I mean, when we talk about Gulf engagement in sports, it's normally the argument, okay, it's sports, either it's sports washing or it's part of soft power. And I'm really struggling with this concept of sports washing or greenwashing or whatever, because it just says, okay, by investing into something else, distracting away from human rights violations. So this underestimates the strategic thinking of governments in the Gulf. So it's much more than that. In particular in Saudi Arabia, and Aziz, you touched upon a couple of points. I think it's mainly 3 drivers for investing in sports. First, social resilience. If you look into civilian obesities, civilian diseases, obesity, diabetes in Saudi Arabia, it's quite clear that sport has to be performed by the normal people, and that is written in the Vision 2030. So it's a state KPI to be achieved, and here by investing into football stars, of course you generate kind of role models to be more active yourself. And what I find quite interesting, it's the investment on the top level is just on the surface. Community sports is heavily, there are so many investments going heavily into the community sports sector. Everybody is doing sports now. It's crazy. It's really fascinating how sport has become a driver of national identity and social resilience. That's first. Second, it's attraction of investment. So by bringing Karim Benzema and CR7 and others to the kingdom, you really position yourself as a hub of excellence, and you really want to engage others to come to the country as tourists, but also as companies. And this is a matter of necessity that Saudi Arabia attracts FDI, and of course it's really below the goals of FDI. So you need more companies to come and invest into the kingdom in order to generate jobs. Different to the UAE or Qatar, where you have not this kind of social pressure and socio-economic challenges. Still relatively high youth unemployment in Saudi Arabia. So sport is a driver to attract investment. And third, and that links conservatism or this contradictory between conservatism and this new liberalization of society. I think when you look into statements of some players who moved to Saudi Arabia, yes, it's about money. We all agree on that. And but players such as Sadio Mane, Bono from Morocco, Karim Benzema, they explicitly mentioned they were inspired by moving to Saudi Arabia, as it is the custodian of the 2 holy shrines, and it's very important for them as Muslim football players to play there. So it's also this nexus about the religious relevance of Saudi Arabia as the cradle of Islam, combined with soft power such as football, is also a very unique selling point for the kingdom. And a final sentence, which brings us back to Africa, everything is related to the preparation of the World Cup. And when we look into the Qatari example, they invested a lot into sport for development projects before its World Cup in 2022, in particular in Africa. So development cooperation through sports is also part of geo-economic, geo-developmental strategy of all the Gulf states. And I'm quite certain that Saudi Arabia will also move more or turn more into sport for development projects in African countries, because they see it as a very important market. They do not host the World Cup for us from the West. They do it mainly for Global South audience, Africa, Asia, etc., similar to what Qatar did, and create here kind of an alternative to the monopolized sport business in the West.
Thank you very much. Damiana?
Thank you very much, and thank you for the question. This is probably my 9th or 10th panel on Gulf Africa this year, most of them on the continent. And this is the one and only question I ever get, which I love because I don't have to answer it. I'm an economist. I have nothing to do with security issues, so I'm not an expert and I can't provide a meaningful answer. I can tell you one thing, though, in terms of how the public opinion perceives this and how the Emirati society perceives this. It perceives it exactly as what it is, allegations. And until something is proven by a decent court with international significance, for us, this is irrelevant. We know what we're doing and we know why we're doing it. We know what we're investing in, and that's security. It's not creating wars. So as long as this remains allegations, we treat it as such. But that brings me to another topic that I didn't touch upon, which is equally important, but Aziz mentioned it, which is about the narrative and about being educated about each other. I think you are absolutely right. The Gulf doesn't know enough about Africa. And I'm not even sure that the African continent knows enough about the Gulf either. And unless we foster what was mentioned earlier and even yesterday, more exchanges, more discussions, more collaboration at the intellectual level, it is very unlikely that we're going to move beyond those platitudes that we tend to exchange among the regions. And I can tell you one thing, the Emirati authorities are very, very conscious of both this lacking of sufficient knowledge and also of the not so positive narrative in certain spheres about the Emirati investment. And we received pretty much a direct order last year from our Ministry of Foreign Affairs as a diplomatic academy to create that kind of network. We were basically told, we need you to convene think tanks from the African continent, as many as possible and as often as possible. We need to know what African think tankers think, what is the opinion on the continent, what they want, what they don't want, and how do we move forward in a way that this engagement is actually beneficial for all of us. We don't want to be the next China, we don't want to be the next Europe, and we don't want to be the next US. We want this partnership to be of a different kind. And only Africa can tell us what Africa wants. And so we've done this twice already. We've convened think tankers for over 17 countries. And we will be doing this again next year because, and that information is directly sent immediately to our authorities. The digest is sent to them to tell them what are the critical issues that have been raised, what are the complaints, what are the needs, what are the red lines for the African intellectuals and therefore hopefully for the African government. So that kind of work is being done beyond everything else.
Thank you very much, Damiana. Desiree, and I know there were more hands raised. Time is running out a little bit, but please, on the concept of agency.
Thank you for the question. So if I got it correct, it's if there needs to be a new term instead of agency, but I don't think that's the case. I think it would be good to look more critically at the term agency itself to understand more what the dimensions of agency are and what the implications of agency are and the sustainability of certain forms of agency. So including like questions like who are the actors exerting agency, and if agency is exerted on a certain level, take for example the state level, what does it mean for agency on the civil society level or other levels? And it also includes looking at how different strategies of agency interrelate with each other. So if you have the NML nexus, so the network ability, maneuverability, leverageability, how do these three strategies interrelate with each other? So in the case of, for example, migrant workers going to the Gulf, which proved to be one of the most important elements, or not elements, but issues in West Asia, Sub-Saharan African issues. For groups of people who might not have agency, how can their agency be increased? But also what agency does exist already that could be elevated? So we found that the issue of remittances is also a form of agency. But also if certain countries, speaking of the state level, increase their leverageability vis-a-vis Gulf countries, can they also raise issues such as migrant rights in Gulf countries? So if Kenya, for example, increases its leverageability towards Gulf countries on the economic level, can it then also increase its leverageability on migrant rights? So how these elements of agency relate to each other, I think that's important. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think we only have 2 minutes left. I was blinded by the light a little bit. I think there was one hand raised over there. And over there. So you start first and then over there, please. So you start first? Okay. Then I don't know. No, I think it was
me. Okay, I thought it was someone else. Okay.
Please be very brief.
Jacob
we don't
Mati.
have any time.
The element of agency vis-a-vis the migrants and whatever, I think we need to start calling some of things for what they are. Yes, there are elements of agency that can be exercised, but for those of us from the Eastern African seabed, this is probably a continuation of slavery. Some of our ancestors disappeared at some point, and they've been erased somehow. But the more we see our presidents are doing certain things, or our administrations doing certain things, it seems like now there's a class alliance against the hoi polloi. And I think these are some of the things that we need to, I agree with you, the other forms of agency that may be required. But it might not necessarily even be economic. It's calling these people for what they are. Thank you.
I think we're running out of time. I see the master of ceremony already behind me. Yeah, I would like to. Then, okay, then just one sentence, and then I invite you to just continue discussions in the breaks. And I don't know, maybe some of you are also at the closed workshops tomorrow. Bob knows better who's invited, but maybe there is also a chance, because we will discuss and go more deeper into some of the details tomorrow in a rather closed workshop, but maybe there is some opportunity to join as well. And very, very, very briefly.
Briefly, thank you so much. Musa, I'm from Mali and the Sahel region. So that's why I say this is very important, because I really appreciate your comment on the diplomatic side and the partnership development. Recently, 2 Emiratis have been released from a kidnapping from the JNIM in Mali with almost like 70 million euros to expand the jihadism. This brings me to your point about the fact of the conservative thing and the partnership development with other area and regions of the world. The part where we have the Islamic Republic in Africa, and especially in the Sahel region and some part of Nigeria, what is creating a lot of trauma in terms of implementation of Islamic rules, and knowing the UAE is the heart of this Islam. Why not? This is the area where you are the most absent, because your presence could help develop more understanding of the region, to not be the deadly things we're having or we experience today. Why are you absent in this area in terms of partnership building, in terms of literacy of religion, in terms of building economic capacity, then being the part where we've seen the visit recently in the US, went from 600 billion to 1 trillion. I would not say it's not needed, but how can you explain this shift? And also, this funded 70 million euros, and JNIM expanded to Nigeria.
Okay, thank you very much. The problem is we won't have the time now to go back to the panel. Please, let's continue the discussions in the breaks. Time is running out, unfortunately. Thank you for all your contributions, for engaging in the discussions, and thank you to the panelists and again to the organizers of the conference. Thank you so much.
Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you so much. Thank you. I think that discussion was illuminating in terms of understanding that region that they were talking about from an African perspective, and to really get to hear about, I like the concept of Saudi first, Saudi only, Saudi alone, or not, or Saudi in partnership. So that was quite interesting.